OpenAir Collective's Carbon Removal Challenge, which is a global university student competition, which the student teams develop innovative carbon removal solutions and submit them for judging, and the winners get to go to New York City to present at Carbon Unbound. And as part of the program, we have monthly webinars. This is our second webinar of this year, focusing on direct air capture superstars, where I'll leave it ambiguous whether the superstars are the people, the panelists here, or the companies. But needless to say, they're big names in the field, and you'll get a great sense of what's going on with direct air capture these days. There's a lot to talk about. So we have 4 panelists, kind of a larger panel for our events, and we'll have them introduce themselves in a bit. But first, I'm going to go over the Carbon Removal Challenge program briefly. So what is the challenge? We launched right before Climate Week in September. We're doing monthly webinars, as I mentioned. We actually are going to have a mentoring program that's expanded this year, going from November to March. And in order to be part of that mentoring program as a student team, you have to register. So registration's already started. Then in March, the applications are due. We have volunteer judges. I should have said the mentors are volunteers as well. This is all a volunteer program. And then in April, we announced the finalists, and in May, the winning teams get to come to New York City to present at Carbon Unbound East. So these are the key dates. The mentorship program's beginning the beginning of November. We already have, Matt just told me the number, and I think it's like 10 mentors signed up already. And so if you're a team considering signing up, please go ahead and do that. Mostly we just need to know what category of carbon removal solution you are going to be working on so that we can line up judges and mentors accordingly. Registration closes in January, submissions due in March, and then the rest I had mentioned. Who has participated? So we've had over 300 students involved in the challenge over the years. This is the 4th year. We doubled participation last year, and we've had participants from 31 different countries, and 5 of them that we know of have gone on to be launching startups, which is very cool. And one of them's even going through the Air Miners boot up camp right now. We are looking for sponsors. Past sponsors include the X Prize, 10 Cents Carbon X program, and of course, Carbon Unbound. So we're very grateful to our sponsors, and please reach out if you are interested in sponsoring. And so our webinar series, these are the anticipated topics. And we're at webinar number 2 today. So that is where I will stop sharing and get into introducing our panelists. So let me just get my notes up real quick. All right, so first off, welcome to all of our panelists today. I'd like you each to introduce yourself. Talk about what position you have at which company, your academic background, and how you became interested in carbon removal, keeping in mind that our primary audience today is the students participating in the Carbon Removal Challenge, so they're university students, undergraduate and graduate students. We probably have a good number of folks who are not students who are perfectly welcome. And I hope enjoy the webinar, but just keep in mind that we're going to focus on students. So Matt, why don't you go first?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Matt Bright. I am the Director of External Affairs, or head of policy for Carbon Capture Inc. Um, Also for the Canadian subsidiary that we set up, True North Carbon Limited, which you might have seen in the press and will be seeing more of soon. So Director of External Affairs means that I lead our policy, our government relations, and our public affairs work. So we are a company of about 50 employees based out in Los Angeles, California. We're both a technology company, direct air capture technology company. We make a shipping container sized module with solid sorbent technology, fancy fans and filters, essentially, that remove carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere, and out the tailpipe of the module comes pure carbon dioxide. So that's the technology angle of our company, and we have our own uh, solid sorbent research team. So we're doing in-house development of that, material sciences. We also have a manufacturing facility out in Arizona, and we'd like to scale that up, obviously, and manufacture a lot more modules. So recently, been in the news, we announced the Tamarack project up in near Calgary, Alberta, at the Deep Sky facility. Um, Deep Sky's a project developer, and so we do the technology, they do the project development. So that's really exciting. We have four modules up there, nameplate capacity of 2,000 tons a year. My background is actually as an environmental scientist, so I got my PhD in soil ecology, a little bit of a different life that I lived back in the day, but very much interested in soil carbon capture and biogeochemical processes to how to put carbon dioxide in soil. So that was a lot of my graduate student research, and I would say that, very much so, if your heart is in climate. There are different niches and different paths you can go down, but some of the time you're going to find that you're going to be jumping lanes. And so, after I did my PhD, I wanted to come to DC for personal as well as professional reasons. What do you do with a PhD in DC? Uh, Work in policy, right? And so I applied for AAAS fellowship, was very fortunate to get that. So I worked on Capitol Hill with a member of Congress during the first Trump administration, and working on soil carbon initiatives, essentially, that got turned into some policy, and also started to work on technical carbon capture because my boss's district had bioethanol refineries that she wanted to do point source carbon capture on. So I kind of got into that technical carbon capture niche really on Capitol Hill back in 2018 and 19, and then was able to move into think tanks and really got into the entire ecosystem. And from there was hired to work for carbon capture in January of 23. So that's
Cool.
my career path till
Thank you.
now, and happy to answer any more specific questions.
All right, great. Thank you, Matt. Jason, how about you next?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Jason Hochman. I founded and was the executive director of the Director Capture Coalition up to this past August, where I've stepped down from my role as executive director of that organization. Under my leadership, we served as a global nonprofit multi-stakeholder coalition of over 110 different startup companies, civil society organizations, advocacy groups, and research and academic institutions located around the world working together to advance and accelerate the development and deployment of direct air capture technology, really helping to build out and serve as the connective tissue for this sector and acting as a global platform for education, collaboration, and connectivity. How I got there. I graduated from college in 2010, earned a double concentrated in history and public policy, was a researcher at a think tank in New York called Demos, working on their Sustainable Progress Initiative for about 2 years before going back to graduate school, where I earned a Master's of Science in Global Affairs, concentrating in energy and environment policy. I wrote my master's thesis on climate change adaptation, which was informed by time I spent at the U.S. Department of Defense working on their climate change adaptation program. And after having earned my graduate degree, got a job at Con Edison, which is the utility in New York City, working on clean energy, energy efficiency, and demand management programs on regulatory strategy and stakeholder engagement. It wasn't until late 2020 that I started learning about and becoming really interested and passionate about this nascent space of carbon dioxide removal. I found it, fascinating. I found it to a degree deeply hopeful that some of the brilliant folks on this call and around the world could harness their capacity for invention and innovation and ingenuity and collaboration to create entirely new tools to help address the climate challenge that we all face and to clean up the mess that we've made in the atmosphere. And I decided I wanted to transition my career into that field. Started doing exactly what many of you are doing right now, I'm sure, on this call, and learning more about the area, getting connected, having conversations with folks. And basically, one thing led to another. I was put in touch with a small group of folks who wanted to establish a global nonprofit multi-stakeholder coalition to move the ball forward on DAC, and got involved with that and did it. I'll happy to answer any other questions going forward though.
Thank you so much, Jason. So I'm noticing this pattern of sort of weaving from one thing to another that's related and getting closer to DAC over time. All right, Noah, how about you next?
Well, I'm happy to break the pattern.
Oh, good.
So I'm Noah McQueen. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns, and I'm currently the Director of Science Innovation at Carbon Removal. I also have a consultancy where I work with early stage climate tech companies to help accelerate their pathway to scale. So my journey to carbon removal actually started with a deep passion for social justice and an understanding of how we use social change to lift all people up. And for me, this started as LGBTQ advocacy and kind of transformed into intersectionality as I started college and realized how interdependent a lot of these social issues truly are. At the same time, I was good at math and science, so I decided to become a chemical engineer. And by junior year, I had the opportunity to take a course on carbon capture. And it was the first time I really reckoned with how disproportionately the climate crisis would impact those that are least responsible for causing it. So I was able to join Professor Jennifer Wilcox, who was recently at the DOE and is currently at the University of Pennsylvania, to work alongside her as an undergrad, working initially on point source carbon capture using mineralization processes. I followed her for a PhD also in chemical engineering, and I had during that time the opportunity to work alongside some really incredible professors. And we developed a new process for removing CO2 from the atmosphere that used naturally occurring minerals in a cyclic process, namely magnesium carbonate or calcium carbonate. And that actually led to the formation of a DAC company called Heirloom that actually took this process that was developed at the university and scaled it. Now scaling it to have a meaningful impact on the climate crisis. After about 6 years with Heirloom, I found myself in a role that really bridged many different important parts of the removal ecosystem, including technology, commercialization, finance. And it was really rewarding to do this at Heirloom, but I realized I could also do this for the ecosystem, understanding how I could translate that into what I personally, how I define impact, have a bigger impact. And that's how I ended up at Carbon 180, much more focused on the policy side from more of a technical background. Happy to answer any other questions as they arise during the panel.
Thank you, Noah. So yes, you broke the pattern. You were like focused the whole time. That's awesome. Okay, Andrew, please welcome and please introduce yourself.
Dude, thanks very much. It's a privilege to be with you, and I really want to commend your work, Matt's work at OpenAir, for all that you're doing for this space. My name is Andrew Fishbein. I am not a scientist, and I'm going back to the pattern of coming to DAC in a rather circuitous kind of fashion. So I'm based in Washington, D.C. I actually grew up in this area, and I was very interested in international affairs growing up, and that was actually sort of the first half of my career. I studied political science and worked in various think tanks in Washington, D.C., always on the government relations side of things, but focused on a host of issues of global significance, and then trying to get parties within the United States, but also internationally, to cooperate on these issues. And the one that really stuck with me is energy and climate. I had the privilege of helping organize some side events at COP meetings, and that, along with the failure of advancing domestic policy in this country to address climate, were kind of the galvanizing moments for me and inspired me to pursue a master's in energy and climate, which I did while I was still working. In retrospect, I'm glad I did it that way, but it was a tough experience to do graduate school while working full time. But that kind of, I think, helped me feel more comfortable diving more deeply with a knowledge base into the energy and climate space. Prior to joining Climeworks, actually, I was in a international security focused think tank. So really thinking about climate and energy from a human security, energy security standpoint. And I really didn't know anything about carbon removal, to be honest. When I did graduate school, the debate raging, the global debate, if I may, put it that way, raging in the climate world was whether we should focus on adaptation at all, or whether that would distract from mitigation. But as time went on, we saw, from IPCC reports, I guess it was the AR6, that really solidified our understanding that we need negative emissions in order to stabilize the climate. So being aware of this kind of trend, I kind of got interested, and it was a bit of serendipity that I saw a job posting that matched my skill set, which was, again, in the government relations space, working for a European company that is trying to scale a technology. So I came really to carbon removal and to DAC from zero, and have been with Climeworks now, leading policy and government affairs in the United States for 3.5 years. So Climeworks is a direct air capture company. We're the global leader in developing and deploying the technology, based in Switzerland. Probably 400 people, I think, at Climeworks at the moment. And we have commercial demonstration plants running in Iceland since 2021, two of them, still the first and only plants of their kind. We also have a modular kind of setup with a shipping container sized unit, solid sorbent. We have lab facilities and testing facilities employing about 150 scientists in Zurich and the surrounding areas. And so it's my job to promote and lay the groundwork for scaling up this technology and our business in the United States. Very happy to be here. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So you're our big international company representative. I know everyone here looks like, it's all American, but Matt's got the Canadian connection now with Deep Sky, and then Andrew's company is based in Switzerland. So I've got several questions lined up for you guys, and we're starting to get some questions in the Q&A. So I will get through some of my questions, but I'm going to leave time for questions from the audience. And one of the things that I forgot to mention early on, just standard, this is CDR protocol, is we're talking about carbon removal. We're not talking about carbon capture and storage. That's totally different. That's capturing fossil fuel emissions. We're talking about capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, potentially through photosynthesis, if not a technological means. So that's carbon removals. And we're not saying let's do carbon removal instead of mitigation. We need mitigation as well, because carbon removal is hard and we can't do it for everything that we're emitting, and we need to draw down what's in the atmosphere already, as well as what residual emissions we're not going to be able to mitigate. So, okay, so let's dive in with the tough questions. So, if people have been paying attention to the news the past couple weeks in the United States, we found out that the federal government is halting funding for a number of DAC hub projects, which affect most DAC companies. But the news isn't all terrible if you look globally, which is why I mentioned the global aspect. I'm going to quote here just briefly from a Carbon 180 article that Courtney Holness published last week. And she says, there's a growing global demand for CDR both in the US and abroad. The EU has introduced the first EU-wide voluntary framework for certifying carbon removals, carbon farming, and carbon storage in products across Europe. Meanwhile, Canada has introduced investment tax credits to accelerate deployment, offering a 60% tax credit rate for investments in DAC projects. In the US, California has updated its Cap and Invest program to include DAC, and Louisiana has woven DAC into its economic development strategy. So given how everything is changing for good or for bad around the world, how is your organization adapting to this changing landscape? Who wants to dive in on that one?
Happy to offer my thoughts.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, as a global company, Climeworks, founded in 2009, Climeworks has always had, I would say, a wide view of technology and project development opportunity. The United States, of course, is a key market and a key place to do business and to scale technology, I think for reasons that are probably obvious to everyone on this call. But coming with that European viewpoint, I think it's never been Climeworks' intention to put all of its eggs in one basket. And for that reason, we've focused very heavily on the United States for a number of reasons, including the positive policy environment. We can kind of get into that maybe a little bit later. But we've been looking very closely at options in Europe, in the Middle East, in Canada, of course, for project development for some time now, and have been part of the policy conversations and the regulatory conversations there to try to enable a scale up of DAC worldwide. As we know, or as I think everyone will know, DAC is a technology that can be sited anywhere in the world because it's pulling carbon straight from the atmosphere. And what's really needed is a combination of a suitable energy storage and other inputs, utilities, if you want to treat them that way, to make a project happen, along with the right kind of regulatory environment that allows you to build, first of a kind plants and secure the financing to do so.
Yeah, the first of a kind plants is the big challenge, right? And does anyone else want to add to that?
I can add a little bit. I think the quote from Courtney is definitely a good summary of kind of where we're at. I think there's two pieces I'll add or supplement. One is I think this positions the US to lose leadership in the carbon removal industry. It's like one thing that, maybe not organizationally, but that is important to recognize is that the US had a lot of policy and was making significant headway in encouraging direct air capture and carbon removal more broadly, homegrown, if you would. And that we are now in a position where that leadership on the global scale is diminishing. And it's also infusing a lot of uncertainty that folks have to navigate. And you're seeing organizations rebalance, whether it's diversifying funding, private capital, corporate buyers, whatever funding sources people are tapping into, exploring expansion internationally, as opposed to those first of a kind projects in the US, or focusing more on different aspects of the business while figuring out like how you bridge that first of a kind gap. The other thing that we like to talk about a little bit at Carbon 180 is regional and pathway specific policy. So instead of having these large sweeping overarching federal policies around all CDR and using it to, I guess, further the industry that way, having things that are regionally specific or tailored to specific regions or jurisdictions, and also pathway specific. So having it specific to direct air capture with storage or bioenergy with carbon capture, and making sure that policy supports specific aspects of the technology and where they will actually be, because those are stickier policies. It reduces uncertainty and a lot of times will get you longer term outcomes that improve your chances of certainty and stakeholder buy-in regionally around the US in particular. So
Great. A lot of nuance there. Okay, unless anyone else wants to jump in, I'll get on to the next question. So this question's for Matt in particular. Can you talk more about Carbon Capture's decision to move Tamarack to deep sky and what the value is of doing that? I have another quote, this time from Phil DeLuna. He had an article in Fortune recently. He said, Canada's approach isn't perfect, but it's consistent. Carbon pricing remains intact. Federal and provincial governments are aligned on industrial decarbonization. There's a growing recognition that if DAC is ever going to be a real industry, not just a research project, it needs to be treated like one, with infrastructure planning, permitting reform, and credit certainty. So with that context, Matt, can you talk a little bit about the deep sky move?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, because it's an important distinction to make, Deep Sky is a project developer, so they purchase DAC equipment and then run it. We own our DAC equipment that is sited at the Deep Sky facility, so that's an important little nuance there. But yeah, so the Tamarack project is ours, and but we are very grateful for our collaborators at Deep Sky that we've worked out a deal to site there. So I think in Phil's comment there, the most important word is the consistency. And that's what Canada has really been building. Very much sort of, I think, maybe the overlooked cousin, little brother, something like that, north of the 49th parallel, has been sort of looking at the US policy and political ecosystem and thinking sort of how can we do things maybe better? Maybe we can learn some things from the US DOE, from Congress. Back in 2024, they set up an investment tax credit, which is essentially all of the capital expenditures that you put into developing a project. You can recoup 60% of those for direct air capture equipment. So that was back in June 2024 that went into law, and that was a big deal. And I would say, they've been looking, the US has focused on a production tax credit, which is a little bit of a different, that is the 45Q tax credit. You'll often hear of it referred to, and that gives you $180 for every ton that you capture and put it in underground. So the incentive there is good, put CO2 where it's going to stay for forever. Canada's taken a little bit of a different approach where they've said, the capital expenditures for these projects are these are expensive projects to build, and so you can recoup them. The province of Alberta, where we have developed a Tamarack project, has added through the ACCIP, it's called, a 12% addition to the federal, which you can stack. So you can actually recoup 72% of your capital expenditures total in Alberta if you develop DAC projects there. So that's a big deal. I would say that there are a lot of synergies between point source capture, carbon capture that you talked about earlier, Sue, of essentially putting a bag over a smokestack. the CO2 there that's captured from an industrial point source still needs to go underground. And Alberta has been working on that for years. They have the Alberta Carbon Trunk Pipeline, the ACTL, which is a big deal. They have the Alberta Industrial Heartland, which is another sort of giant, massive industrial carbon capture type of program. Pathways. They're looking more into huge decarbonization projects. So that's very attractive in Canada. And I think the other thing that's really important to note for smaller companies of our size is that there are strategic pots of money in Canada, capital to deploy projects. And the challenge now in the US with the uncertainty in the Director Capture Hubs program and the future there is, where are you going to get capital to build these projects? And, hard tech is, again, it's expensive, it's challenging. The first of a kind, as you mentioned, Sue, is really, really hard to get funding for those. And Canada has federal pots of money that are for capital, as well as potentially bank investments into projects that are really important here. So I think the great thing is, as Andrew mentioned earlier too, not putting all your eggs in one basket and realizing that just because the US is having its moment here about, climate change and a lot of other things, that, other countries are looking on and saying, how can we really attract some of this? Carbon dioxide, it's in the atmosphere, it mixes really quickly, it goes everywhere, right? And so you can capture carbon dioxide anywhere, as was mentioned earlier. So Canada was really important. We saw some of these things happening. It helps somewhat as well too that our CEO is Canadian, and so he's been aware of some of these things sort of from the beginning. And when we saw the U.S. Having some growth pains last November, it was sort of all of the Tetris pieces had already lined up, that it was kind of an easy decision at the end of last year, early this year, to say, okay, let's do a project up in Canada.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for that, Matt. And I just want to point out that we've had a strong Canadian presence at the Carbon Removal Challenge the past 2 years. We've had 2 Canadian teams make our 5 winners the past 2 years. And so it's been impressive. And some of the teams were pretty large. So even, at the university level, supporting the favorable policy in Canada, we're seeing a lot of strength there. And we expect to see more Canadian submissions this year. So go Canada. All right. So Matt, you mentioned the CapEx help from the Canadian policy and the importance of being able to fund those first plants. That's something that came up in a recent CDR FYI market snapshot. And one of the things that they asserted was that having a lower capital expenses is going to be more important than having lower operational expenses, or the expenses of running the plant. I was wondering if anyone here had thoughts on that, on whether you see that as a valid point where you're focusing on CapEx more than OpEx, or what do you think?
I'm not.
Okay, go ahead, Noah.
I was going to say I'm happy to jump in, but I saw Andrew come off mute. I think I'll add nuance maybe again, but I think in the immediate term, what you're seeing is that capital cost is heavier weighted. And what I mean when I say that is that there's always a cost associated with your capital cost. It's the cost of interest essentially on however much you're going to take out to build a project. And in the early days, that cost of interest is high. because of the type of money you're taking in order to build a project. So the capital cost becomes much higher weighting essentially compared to the operating cost. So focusing on bringing down the capital cost or a lower cost project will ultimately be more impactful in the early days. The more you prove out a technology, you go from that first of a kind towards an nth of a kind, or your 100th plant, your 1,000th plant, depending on how big you're building. That interest comes down because you've proven that this is repeatable. You can do it over and over again. And essentially the cost of building the thing decreases just because you don't have to pay as much interest on your loan, essentially. Then the operating cost really takes over. Your operating costs will begin to dictate how much that carbon removal costs, and it becomes a larger percentage of your overall cost of a ton of CO2 removed. The other thing that we have to consider, so in addition to like the loan interest rate, essentially, you also have to consider the availability of things like energy. So if your operating costs are driven by energy requirements, it may not be driving your overall cost to have that energy, but you're going to have to find a place where you can get enough energy. And those two things become very important to the viability of your carbon removal process, your direct air capture process. I'll kick it maybe to Andrew to see if he has anything.
Yeah, Noah, thank you. I mean, you captured it really, really perfectly. I could only add maybe just a little bit of detail around the edges that, indeed, it sort of changes over the lifetime of your technology maturation journey. It's also highly dependent on what's available to you. In the United States, as we talked about, there is a production tax credit. That actually significantly changes the overall economics of a project over time. As opposed to the Canadian example that Matt explained really well in the investment tax credit situation. Energy, is often talked about as a major driver of cost for a lot of direct air capture technology approaches. And so that's a massive OpEx consideration. So, long way of saying it's really quite bespoke over time. And, as you scale, some of the things that kind of come along with that. Number one, you have less project risk after you build the first project. Assuming you're building it in a similar location with a similar workforce and supply chain. And those may be big assumptions. But as you go, you might be able to access things like project debt. But a first of a kind direct air capture plant isn't going to be a particularly attractive investment to a bank, for example. Banks are very comfortable financing solar projects because those are very well established. It's clear what the revenue stream is going to be from a solar project. You can game that out, calculate it very, very easily. So that's one consideration. The only other I'd mention is that as you scale, and we're talking about really getting to larger scale, you're building a supply chain around you and integrating with a local and a regional and global supply chain. And so as you do that, your manufacturing and your supply chain will get more efficient. And so you can really realize some very important efficiencies over time.
Great, thank you. All right, so kind of continuing on that train of thought, it occurs to me that Climeworks, Heirloom, and CarbonCapture all have very small modular designs so that you can iterate quickly and learn by doing. But 1.5, which bought Carbon Engineering, is going big with their Stratus project, which is supposed to go live later this year with an anticipated capture rate of 500,000 tons per year, which would be by far the largest plant, active plant. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about small modular versus large CapEx, and its impact on scaling and other factors?
I
Okay,
can.
Matt.
So go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, so I think the distinction that needs to be made here are the balance sheets when you're looking at how these are funded. Obviously, Carbon Engineering, owned by Oxy, has a very different balance sheet than the rest of our companies. And so they're able to do projects that are significantly bigger. The challenge, I think, we have my company, CarbonCapture, has raised the least among the companies that are here. We are financing the Tamarack project. This is equity financing, and Andrew mentioned it earlier. Thinking about, can you get banks to be able to do things to finance Oxy's in that league where they're able to do things like that. Also, I will say their technology platform is different from the three companies here. Andrew and I have solid sorbent technology. Noah's technology is calcium looping, essentially. Hope I got that right, Noah. And the it's a liquid solvent that carbon engineering has. So that's also, you have to start with a different scale there, is all I'll say.
And just adding in a bit here, just one important point is that Oxy's Stratos facility, they're basically going to build and operate the first half of that capacity to enable learning by doing before building and installing kind of the remaining capacity. So in that way, they're trying to, in a certain sense, be able to benefit from the learning by doing approach. And just tying together some of the other thoughts that have been shared on this panel, as Matt, Noah, and Andrew have all been noting that it's extremely difficult to get that first of a kind project financed. At the same time, the first of a kind project is how you are going to learn how these facilities and systems operate in the real world. And that is where, alongside the economies of scale Andrew mentioned, where you're going to get improvements in the technology, where you're going to get improvements in how it performs, where you're going to get more energy efficiency, where you're going to get lower costs. So it's a really critical egg, nut to crack. And there is this bit of a chicken and the egg in that you're most likely not going to solve everything at a lab scale. You need to understand how these technologies and how these systems will operate in real world conditions. And there are going to be things that no one has thought about that are going to happen that you will learn from. And for that reason, it's really important to be able to have project-led, deployment-led innovation. And one of the bigger challenges facing this sector, or at least the startups in the sector, is how do you get the money to build that facility when there is risk upon risk upon risk, to say nothing of needing to have secured, long-term offtake agreements from creditworthy partners to be able to justify getting the financing for that facility. At the same time, there's a lot of excitement in this space because we really do need to deploy this technology at scale, and it is so important that we are able to do so in a way that is as effective, efficient, and it's done as well as possible.
If I could just underline, your point, Jason, that, learning by doing is really vital. You have to prove your technology in the lab at the bench scale and so forth. But learning by doing is the only way that you can actually scale something in the real world. And I'm dropping in the chat here a blog post that Climeworks published last year, actually, about this very topic. Because we wanted the general public to understand a little bit more about how it works when you're trying to scale a new technology in the field, and how you learn things that you had learned about problems that you had no idea that you were going to face until you actually did it.
Great point. Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for that link. Okay, so I've got one last question, then we'll jump to audience questions. So I don't know if you've seen, but Grant Faber, who is a well-known consultant out in the CDR space, who used to be at DOE, came out with a list of CDR companies, and it lists 169 DAC companies. So students participating in the Carbon Removal Challenge may end up working for these companies, or starting their own and growing the number. What advice do you have for them about how to evaluate these companies and their options? And maybe I'll start with you, Jason, if you have thoughts about that.
Well, I think it does depend a lot on what type of role you're looking for. Are you more on the scientific or technical side? Are you looking at more on a policy focused role, finance related, marketing, comms? Because I think at the all of those factors are very are critical. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the right people or team in place who'll be able to create the you know get the other legs of the stool so that you can actually deploy that technology, doesn't do you much good. You also might have the best commercial and policy people, and you've got the right relationships, and you've got the foot in the door, and you can, then go deploy your not necessarily the best, the systems. It's I would just kind of look at the people involved, if you know them, what kind of partnerships exist. It's really a hard question to say, given the breadth of the field, the different types of approaches. Uh, sorry, it's not the best answer, but I would just say like it is a matter of understanding who's involved, how much you trust and credibility they have, and what kind of validation you can find externally among, from the 170 or so companies that are out there.
Yeah, it reminds me of the dot-com boom, which I went through years ago in a previous career path. And just so many ideas, so many new things out
Yeah.
there. And then ultimately there was a phase of consolidation when there was an economic downturn, and
I'll
but
say
the
I'll say
excitement's there.
I'll say one more thing on this, and that is don't be shy about utilizing your network or reaching out to folks or making connections and doing your own due diligence. You're not going to be the only person that has thought about this sector and who the credible players are and who might not be. And so just if you are debating which company you want to try to work for, talk to people. I think that's probably the best advice I can give on that.
Thanks. Anyone else want to add to that?
Maybe just briefly, not necessarily about evaluating the companies, but about looking for positions too, is also understanding like what's most important to you. It's like there's several questions that you can ask yourself in terms of like what compensation and benefits do I need? How important is stability? That you'll have to do some self-reflection on, and then understanding how companies can meet those needs for you. So understanding that like that interview process is a two-way street and it can be really hard. But you also have to understand like what you need in those conversations. And then you can evaluate how the company can meet you there as well. So from a technical perspective, there's of course, if you ask a bunch of questions about business model and how they're doing removals and the technology, that comes off very strongly to the company too, because you're engaged. Also understanding like where you need them to meet you.
Great, thank you. Great words of wisdom. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Matt Parker, who is co-founder of the OpenAir Collective and is the originator of the Carbon Removal Challenge program, and he's going to lead us through audience Q&A.
Okay, yeah, we've got a bunch of good questions here. I'm not sure we will get to all of them, but I'm going to try and get to as many of them as we can. So let's rapid fire answer these ones so we can get to as many of them as we can. First question I'm going to ask is, considering the current political situation, do you see a good career prospects in DAC/CDR sector?
Short answer, yes. It's a growing sector. It's very exciting. And to Noah's earlier point, one of the things that has kept me here is because it's exciting and dynamic, and everybody that I know who's working in DAC is a really dedicated, smart person.
I would say little nuance there. Short term, bumpy road. So long term, yes.
You got to be comfortable. You got to be comfortable in uncertainty, and
Okay.
a job description in a startup, maybe editorializing is kind of meaningless. So there's there's a lot in the negotiation and understanding what the role is going to be, what the scope of it is, and being willing to jump in with both feet, and get outside your comfort zone, I think is important in a growing sector like this.
Okay, next question. What is the next great breakthrough in DAC going to be? It's a tough one. You can just
I
guess.
mean, I started to take up so much airtime, but I think, at the risk of plugging Climeworks a little bit strongly here, I think it's a reduction in energy use and boosting efficiency in serious ways. That's technology improvement, and it's in the field as well. We cut our energy use in half with our latest structured sorbent technology. And that's been proven out over about 1,300 cycles in a large scale real world testing facility. So I'm most excited about those efficiency and energy reduction goals that we're achieving.
Okay. Considering the growing emphasis on large-scale DAC deployment, how do you foresee the upscaling of sorbent manufacturing affecting the sustainability profile and life cycle performance of DAC technologies? It's a biggie.
That's like a 700 level question.
If I had to guess.
Who asked that?
PhD student, actually, yeah. The PhD
Yeah.
student in engineering at Purdue.
Yeah, I mean that ties a little bit into what Andrew was saying there about the energy efficiency. I would say that, um, the great thing about DAC is that you have these ancillary industries that are attached to it, and different technology buckets again. So Climeworks and CarbonCapture's technology platforms are very similar. Um, Heirloom's different, carbon engineering is different, so they have different sort of ancillary industries. But for the solid sorbent one, I would say that the great thing is that there are a bunch of companies out there that are very interested in material science, making sorbents, structuring sorbents, scaling sorbents, that sort of thing. So where my company is, and also universities, right? And so that's part of the ecosystem that's always been sort of amazingly American, is let's get the public universities really interested in bench scale research, that translates over into companies and that sort of thing. So I would just say that that's a really specific question here, but the good thing is still that there are a lot of companies out there that are involved in the whole process of sorbents, from gram scale up to the fully structured product.
Okay, moving on. You all mentioned being motivated to tackle climate change through CDR, yet the fossil fuel industry has the financial muscle to scale up technologies. How do your organizations address this paradox?
I'm happy to start off with that one. I think that it's not just financial muscle that fossil fuel companies have. They also have, beyond that, assets in the balance sheets. They also have the exact set of capabilities, of know-how, of expertise, of understanding the subsurface geology and how to move um, you know, large volumes of hydrocarbons around, and how to navigate infrastructure and permitting processes. In addition to financial muscle, they also have policy muscle, as we all, or, lobbying muscle. It is, I think, a bit foolish to think that casting aside the people who have all the tools at their disposal to be able to deploy this technology at scale is foolish if you actually care about getting this technology out there in the real world. They it's I think quite reasonable to be skeptical and to think that, oh, this is going to be the type of thing that they'll spend, X amount on deploying the project and then 25X on marketing that they've deployed this project or whatever it may be, and just a real greenwashing exercise or reason to just maintain business as usual. But their wherewithal, their capacities, their expertise, their capability, their infrastructure are just perfectly aligned with what is needed to be able to deploy DAC at scale. And I think it's a fool's errand to think that we can just do this without them. And I think it's about creating um, incentives and structures that, these are profit-minded organizations that they can see this as a new commercial business opportunity to get this technology out there in the real world and get carbon dioxide into the ground, that they happen to be the ones that, they took the carbon dioxide out of the ground, put it in the air. It just so happens that they might be the ones who are best positioned to take it out of the air and back into the ground.
Maybe I'll just add to that too. I think the tension that we also have to hold, I agree with what Jason has said. I think the tension that we also have to hold is that a lot of the places where these projects are being proposed are also in communities that have been historically harmed by the oil and gas industry. So it can create a lot of friction with those communities, and rightfully so, they've been harmed by the oil and gas industry. So holding tension with these are companies who commit human rights violations, who have committed human rights violations, and they have the know-how, the wherewithal, and the financial backing to actually scale the industry. And being where we are, we have to sit with both of those.
Okay, I think we've got time for maybe one more. I don't think we're going to get to everyone's questions. Sorry, everybody. But I think we're going to go out with this one. Given the growing scrutiny around carbon credit quality, what standards or verification mechanisms do you think will define durable DAC credits in the next few years?
Well, DAC has the benefit of being highly measurable, direct physical measurements, pretty much all along the capture through storage chain. And there are, of course, a number of standards bodies. We don't have global compliance systems for carbon, but I think that there's a good kind of ecosystem that has formed and is really diligently looking at standards. So Climeworks works with one called Puro, and we've been very happy to align on the methodology that we're using, which is at this stage I think it's difficult because it's bespoke for each DAC plant. But to certify and verify that when we say we are taking a molecule of carbon out of the air, that we are. And this is something that I think is really DAC's advantage, and why it's the gold standard of carbon credits, carbon removal credits on the market.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Matt. I'm just gonna share our last slide here. So thank you everyone for attending. This was a great discussion, and I really appreciate everyone's expertise. Our next webinar is in 3 weeks, November 11th. We've got Tank Chen from CDR Jobs and Ben Swainbank, who has been a judge for the Carbon Removal Challenge, and he also is a volunteer with Work on Climate. And I'm hoping to get another panelist to join us, but we'll have to update that information as it comes out. So please register for that. The link is in the chat and on our website. And in addition, we've just launched our crowdfunding campaign. We are a volunteer-run organization aligned with the nonprofit, so we are seeking sponsors and donors. So if you like what you saw here today, if you think this is an exciting program that you want to see continue, please consider supporting the program in one way or another. All right, well, thank you everyone again, and I hope to see you on November 11th.